Welcome to Masters of Growth for Plaintiff Law Firms. This is where we sit down and talk to industry leaders to bring you lessons, stories, and insights that will help you grow your revenue, margins, and the happiness that you have at work. All right, I'm really excited. My guest today was previously the president of an industry-leading case management software company called Needles. She is now the Chief Strategy and Marketing Officer at Vista Consulting, or the Vista Consulting Team. And the Vista Consulting Team, they are the business resource for plaintiff law firms. Their team of experts specializes in helping plaintiff firms optimize their operations and realize their goals. So I'm very excited to welcome Mary Ellen Murrah to this podcast. Thank you for joining us here.
Oh, thank you so much, Julian. I'm excited about this conversation.
Awesome. Well, maybe just a great place to start is, can you walk through how you work with plaintiff firms at Vista Consulting? What types of work do you typically do? What types of firms do you typically work with? What does an engagement typically look like? Just to kind of get a sense of how you guys are working with firms.
Yes, absolutely. So at Vista, and thank you for that great intro, we are the business resource for plaintiff law firms. So we are a consulting group, and we come in and help with everything under roof at a plaintiff law firm that has to do not with the practice of law, but with the business of running a law firm. So what that typically looks like, what a typical engagement looks like, is starting where they are. We need to know where the firm is first. So we do something called a law firm assessment, which involves our team going on site to the firm for a couple of days and really getting a sense of all of those things that are happening at the firm. It's nice to be on site because then you get a real taste of the culture of the office, which is interesting. There's just some things that can't quite be described unless you're there in person. But we look at all of those things, from what their intake processes are to what the life of a case looks like from the time it comes into their intake team all the way through all of those, important markers throughout the case to either settlement or litigation, whatever the resolution of that case would be. We look at their internal marketing, we look at their accounting, we look at their HR practices, even down to the building. What does the building look like? What does the areas where the clients see look like? All of those things that have to do with how we run a business that happens to practice law. Vista also has some other ancillary services like a small talent acquisition arm and a fractional CFO service. But, once we've done that law firm assessment, we generate a report and kind of put those things. Every consultant generates a report, right? What we think sets us apart and makes us a little bit different is it is not a cookie cutter. It is very custom to that firm. And then we hope that firm will retain us for some time to really work alongside them, hold their hand through implementing those things that we recommended in the report. So really being an accountability partner to work alongside the firm, which is so much fun because we do really get ingrained into the DNA of that firm, really get to know their team, really get to know their leadership team, and kind of help them hit those goals, help them implement those things that sometimes can just be a big lift and a hard thing to get across the finish line without somebody giving you the benefit of seeing it done at so many other firms across the nation and kind of helping walk you through that process.
I love that. I love that it's not cookie cutter too. And it's not, I've seen a lot of sort of, not just in the legal field, but in a lot of fields, courses and coaching and things like that sometimes is a little more like, here's what it is for everybody. And so I love that you guys go in, you kind of do that assessment, you really understand where that firm's at. I'm curious, when you are generating these reports on all these different firms, as you work with different firms, like, what are the most common areas for improvement that you see across the firms? Like, if you could pick out the top two, you're like, I know with a 90% certainty, if I go into any firm in the country, like, I'll probably see one of these two problems.
Well, as you suggested, every firm is different. So every firm has different problems. But you're right. There are some things that are commonalities that firms sometimes tend to either get wrong or not put as much time and effort into as maybe they could. And I think the number one that springs to my mind when you ask that question is with their intake department. I think intake departments are often, we know how important they are, but we don't necessarily put the effort into the intake department that it truly deserves. There are so many pieces in the intake department where things can go wrong. There's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot happening. You've got to make sure that the team is trained. You've got to make sure you're listening to those calls. You have to make sure that they're answering those calls with empathy, that they understand what the firm's criteria is for taking a call. all the way through what does that chase process look like? And so many times firms will say, oh, I invested all this money in marketing and it's just not working. When truly the marketing really isn't the issue. It's that we're not properly handling those leads that come into the firm. So intake is just one of those pieces with so many moving parts that I think there's often opportunities at the firm to tighten that up and make that be really the best that it can be. The other, and I'm struggling between two, but I'll pick one. I think the other area that maybe we see a lot of opportunities for improvement is in technology usage, specifically the usage of the firm's case management software. Sometimes firms will make a decision to switch case management softwares, go through that arduous process of moving data from one system to another, put all that work in, and then not take that next step of really training their team on how to use the new system, where we all collectively put things in the new system. They won't put together an SOP manual that tells us not only in general how we use this system, but what specific field, what information goes into this specific field. Because without that level of granularity, without a naming convention that everybody is using in the same way, it becomes so hard to run reports. It becomes so hard for everybody in the firm to be able to access a case and know exactly what's going on in that case, because we have such a smooth process for entering that information and using our case management system in the same way. So oftentimes firms fall apart on that training piece and that holding people accountable to using a new system and embracing that new system.
Fascinating. So yeah, sounds like potentially three, because you're thinking about two potential problems you see for the second piece. But the two that you brought up, yeah, so intake and then just best practices and proper usage of whatever case management software is being used. That makes total sense. It's one thing to have the software. It's another thing to make sure everyone's consistently, putting things in the right place and updating the software. Otherwise, you're not going to get much out of it. So it makes total sense. Maybe I'm curious just to double click, because I know you and I talked a little bit offline about this with intake. Are you able to go a little more granular, if possible, just on like maybe specific problems that you see in intake? And are there any like benchmark KPIs, maybe from a conversion standpoint, from lead to qualified lead and qualified lead to signed case? Like, where do things drop off? What are sort of some benchmarks maybe firms should be aspiring to?
Yeah, great question. And I'll take this opportunity to say, in general, every firm is different and there's so many variables and there's different ways that firms set up their intake department. But again, there are a few things that I think are those best practices along the way, right? So I think typically where there's opportunities for improvement, number one, some firms don't track what we call the wanted rate. So you have all of these leads coming in, right? And so some firms will just say, hey, let's say there's 100 leads coming in and I've converted 50 of those leads. So I have a 50% conversion rate. Not really. So you don't want all 100 of those leads, right? Some of them just straight up don't meet your criteria. Some of them are calling about a case type that you don't even handle. So we want to break it down by case type and say, all right, let's use MVA or car wreck cases as an example. I have 100 car wreck potential new clients calling in each month or web forming in or however they're getting to us each month. Maybe I only want 50 of those. Maybe 50 of those don't meet my criteria. So what I really care about is those 50 I do want and what's happening with those 50 that I do want. So if there's not a place in their case management system or their lead management system to mark off that this is a wanted case, that's one sort of real easy thing that a firm can do to tighten up those reports a little bit so that they know, what is my wanted rate? Because that's something that we can measure month over month. So if we know every month our wanted rate, and typically the average wanted rate countrywide for car wreck cases is somewhere between 40 and 60%. Obviously that varies based on laws in the state. It also varies based on, some firms are boutique firms and they're only taking a threshold above a certain amount. Some firms will take anything. So it's going to be somewhere usually in that 40 to 60 range. But once we've identified that, we can look at that over months. So if we know our wanted rate is typically 55%, we get a month where it goes significantly down. Well, that's a reason for us to take a look. What happened in that month? Did we change something in our marketing? Did we hire a new intake specialist? Did something happen that we made a tweak? We pulled a certain lever and something happened and that changed. If we don't know what that baseline is, then it's hard to know what those differences are month over month, right? So once we get those, about 40 to 60% of those car wreck cases are coming in as wanted, then and again, I hesitate sometimes to give out numbers because sometimes people will really fixate on those numbers. And if they're not hitting that number, it's like, oh, well, everything's horrible. And no, obviously there's a lot of variables, but in general for MVA cases, we say the conversion rate should be about 92% or better on those cases that you want. So if you're not in that range, that's okay. Maybe you're at 80% and you want to look at month over month. How can we improve from that 80%? How can we get ourselves up to that 92% or better range? And you want those wanted criteria to be applied consistently across all of your intake specialists. It's not, well, this intake specialist thinks this should be a case and this intake specialist thinks it shouldn't. Those things should be very clearly laid out so that all of your team members know what is a wanted case in this firm? What meets our criteria? When is it okay for me to sign this up? Because I have very clearly spelled this out. So I might have gone on a lot there, and I hope that's what you were looking for. But those are some of those areas in intake that maybe have some opportunities for improvement and some general numbers.
That makes total sense. And that's incredible. So basically you're saying be really clear about what types of cases you want. Make sure everyone on the intake team is clear and on the same page on what a wanted case is, then track the wanted cases. So, and maybe a benchmark, and again, every firm's different. I hear you on that, but somewhere between 40 to 60% of all leads come in are wanted cases, and then from that, ideally you're closing, above 90%, or I think you said 92%. And if you're lower than that, okay, but then maybe we can tweak and figure out how to improve that. And then if your wanted rate is below that, is it accurate, or is the right way to think about it that if the wanted rate is, let's say 30%, and your conversion rate on the wanted case is, let's say it's 95%, then is that more indicative that you have a marketing problem? And it's like, okay, we're attracting leads maybe from the wrong places, or our messaging is wrong. But if the wanted rate is maybe 60% and the conversion off the wanted cases is maybe 50%, then maybe it's a little more of an intake sales problem than a marketing problem. Is that the right way to think about it?
It definitely could be. And I should say, I gave you some of those numbers really based on car wreck cases, but your wanted rate's going to be different depending on the case type. So for example, if you're a firm that handles med mal, obviously the wanted rate on med mals are much, much lower. You're going to do a whole lot of intakes in order just to get one med mal case that you're going to sign up. So I think the important thing is for you to look at, what does this look like month over month over month? So we can tell, A, what our baseline is, and B, when there are variations on that. So we can do a little digging, do a little diagnosing. But in general, yes, if our wanted rate is lower than normal and we've maybe made a tweak to our marketing, that may be indicative that we're getting a whole lot of leads in that don't necessarily fit that criteria. So maybe we need to tweak something in that messaging. Maybe maybe we're doing lead buying or something like that, where it's just bringing in a whole lot of leads that are not going to convert, or that are just not right for our firm. So yeah, that's definitely a good way to kind of look at it and start that diagnostic process. And sometimes you start looking at, we like to see those reports where they are very specific to the intake specialist, because you might have somebody who you can tell is really converting well and somebody who's not converting so well. So let's go investigate that a little bit. Let's listen to that person who's converting well. What do their calls sound like? What are they doing differently? Can they be somebody who can train other team members, or who other team members can listen to, or be near them a little bit, kind of hear how they're handling people? Are they particularly empathetic? Are they particularly able to kind of sell the firm during those calls? Or are they your closers? Do you have people that can just kind of come in if we're struggling during that chase process? So a lot of times those reports there's the reporting, and it's important to have it, but then there's also the ability to go in and really analyze what's happening in those reports and say, what's happening here and what can we do differently to get those numbers where we want them to be?
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And yeah, that also makes sense that don't use MVA benchmark intake conversion data when you're talking about, med mal or another practice area. That makes total sense. Yeah. And another thing that you brought up before this is just marketing, and just overlooked marketing, or types of marketing that's undervalued, or how marketing affects talent acquisition. What are some of the marketing opportunities that firms just aren't taking advantage of or don't realize the benefit in?
Yeah. This is an interesting question, because so many times we'll go into a firm and they've got a really sophisticated marketing program in place. Maybe they're a big advertiser that's on TV and they've got billboards and LSAs, and they're really singing along with a whole lot of marketing. And the one area that I think we see firms overlook or not put as much credence into is really that internal marketing piece, the marketing to your current client base or the base of people that have already been through your firm. So hopefully you're entering everybody that you've ever worked with and everybody who's ever called your firm into your case management system so that you've got this amazing database of contacts that you can be reaching back out to on a regular basis. So, and maybe that looks very simple, like kind of old school marketing. Maybe it looks like birthday cards or holiday cards or newsletters where you're putting out some information about the firm and a recipe or things like that. But it's really touching those people who have been through. Sometimes with firms that have a variety of practice areas, it's reminding clients that we also do this thing. So we recently worked with a firm that had an estate planning piece of it, and they had this huge loyal client base of estate planning clients. And they also had a PI arm of their firm. And so a big marketing push that they did was to just educate their estate planning clients that, hey, we also do this. We want to be your call no matter what legal issue you are experiencing because we can help. And it was a big deal. A lot of times, we think that those big cases come from being on TV or being on Billboard, but many times the biggest cases in the firm come from referrals from people that are already in your system. So if you can treat clients right, if you can get that marketing piece of having just amazing world-class client service and treating people well from the moment that they first touch your firm all the way through resolution of their case, they hopefully can be walking advertisements for you. So give them swag, ask for their referrals, ask for them to go on and do a review for you, treat them well, continue to reach out to them even after they've become a client, sending them that birthday card and reminding them that you're still there and you still care about them. Even if you have a campaign where you have a phone call touch or a text touch after they've already been through, their case has been resolved, to kind of remind them that you're still there and you still care. That's the marketing piece that I think we often see firms overlook. And for talent acquisition, you mentioned that I think firms put so much time, money, and effort into, I'm building this website, I'm building this social media presence to attract clients. And that's amazing. You absolutely should do that. But keep in mind, those things are also visible to people who may want to come work at your firm. So when you have an open position, the first thing people are going to do is come take a look at your website, come take a look at your social presence, look at anything that's on Glassdoor and kind of do their investigative digging before they come into your firm. And if there's nothing on your social media that talks about your team, that highlights your culture, if there's nothing on your website that really has like a career page that talks about what it's like to work at the firm, sometimes those people are going in blind. So you do have an opportunity. You've already got this website built out. Hopefully you've already got this social media built out. Use it as a tool to attract talent as well. Talk about what sets you apart as an employer. Highlight your team. When you highlight your team members, hopefully they share that on their social media channels as well. And that just gets you more eyeballs out in the world on your firm and what your firm is doing and the kind of culture that you have.
That makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of people forget that hiring is marketing. It is sales. You still have to build your brand, your employer brand, and think about marketing just as much. We don't do it as often depending on the size of the employer, but when you do it, it's obviously very critical. What are your thoughts on talent acquisition, hiring in general? Like when looking for people, I've heard it's a pretty tight labor market out there. How should you structure your interview process? How should you structure your hiring process? And should you be looking for people with more experience and just optimizing for those unicorns? Or should you be looking for maybe people with potential and then trying to develop them? Like, what are your thoughts in general on sort of best practices with hiring?
Well, first off, you're absolutely right. It's a bananas labor market. It's the freaking Wild West out there, it seems. And every firm that we go into, I can't think of a firm that I have visited recently that hasn't shared talent acquisition as a pain point for them, as something that is difficult to find talent, difficult to take all the time to go through that process, because it's a time consuming process. I think, you got to get an ad out there and then you get the people that are coming in, all the resumes that are coming in. How do you sift through that and decide the right people to bring in? What does that interview process look like? There's just so many moving parts to it that I think firms get frustrated. And tend to maybe take some shortcuts there, and hopefully some of this will help. But I think the right ad is important. Right now, there's so much like SEO pieces of it that need to go into an ad that you don't need this like crazy super long ad. You want to make sure you're pretty succinct about what you're looking for, but also get in that ad what sets the firm apart a little bit, and where they can find more information about your firm. Once you've kind of sifted through the resumes a little bit, it's a good idea to have a short phone interview with that person. Can they walk and chew gum at the same time? Are they somebody that you even want to invest more time in? And I think being really responsive to those resumes that you get in that are good resumes is another area where firms fall apart. They're busy, they don't have time to do it. But people who are top talent aren't waiting a week to get a response. They're getting a response immediately. And so if you're waiting a really long time to get back to somebody, you might lose that person. You might lose that good person. And now you're pulling from a pool that's not as high caliber as maybe you could have if you were responsive in that. For the interview process, once they've kind of gotten through that 15-minute phone qualifier interview and you're actually having a real interview with them, I think it's important for that to be a two-way street, for that to be just as much talking as it is listening, because you're not just ascertaining if this person can do this specific job. You're ascertaining, is this person going to fit in to my firm, to what we believe in, to what our values are, to what our current team looks like? Is this person going to be able to be somebody who can come in and walk the way we walk and talk the way we talk? And that's important, and not every person is a fit. So just because they've done this job at a personal injury firm before does not necessarily mean that they are the right fit for your firm. Some firms are incredibly buttoned up and their culture looks like that. Some firms are incredibly, I'm in jeans and a hoodie. And so different people fit with those different pieces and cultures. So that interview process, I like to ask open-ended interview questions where people can talk about themselves a little bit. Tell me about a problem that you had to solve. Tell me about a time when you messed up at work. What did that look like and what happened? And that gives you so much information without giving you so much information, right? So that can let you know this person is able to admit there has been a time that they messed up at work and they can talk about it. This person was able to take that time they messed up and learn from it or spin it in a positive light. So there's just so many ways that you can talk to somebody that's not just necessarily, hey, have you ever done a lien negotiation before? Yes. Okay, check. You can come work here. It really should be, almost like a date where I'm getting to know you, you're getting to know me. And hopefully that person that you're interviewing has some questions about the firm that give you an opportunity to talk about the firm and what you're expecting and what your culture is. And hopefully you've got that next process in place, which is that onboarding piece where you can really welcome somebody into a firm, train them on what their job is, but also what our mission and vision are, what we believe in as a firm, what success in this role is going to look like, what your KPIs are, how you hit them, we're ready for you. There's so many pieces of that I could go on and on all day, but those are some of the big ones.
That makes so much sense. And the questions you described resonate so much with me. I've always thought about interviewing. Obviously, there's like the competency and the capability side of the interview, but then the value alignment and the culture fit, and trying to ask questions to ascertain how people have handled certain situations in the past to try to understand like how would they fit here. And yeah, that totally resonate. I love your perspective on that.
Yeah, and I don't even love just the idea of hiring because I have expertise. I mean, most jobs at a law firm, I can train you on what you need to do for that job. So if you're a values fit, I'd rather that all day long. If you're a culture and values fit at the firm, I can train you on the actual job, but I can't always train you on that culture and values fit.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah, that was going to be my next question is, with this tight labor market, like to what extent does it make sense? Maybe this differs by role. I don't know. To what extent does it make sense to try to find the unicorn, so to speak, versus develop the talent? It sounds like if you've got some training capabilities, maybe look for the non-unicorn that has the potential versus trying to find the unicorn. Is that accurate or a good way to think about it?
Yeah, I mean, unicorns are a rare commodity, right? So if all of the firms out there are looking for the unicorn, no one's going to find the unicorn. It's really hard to find that person who absolutely ticks every single one of those boxes, has worked at a PI firm before, has done this specific job before, is a values fit, can also do this job on the side, has red hair, is 6 foot tall. You start getting so granular. Some firms start getting so granular on what they're looking for. And there's not that many unicorns out there, but there's a lot of good talent out there, people who can do that job if we will take the time to invest in them and train them. And for some firms, they're really good at training. And we even say that there's a difference. There's training firms and there's non-training firms. If you have the capability to be a training firm, and every firm eventually over time has the capability to be a training firm, it's just a matter of putting the work in to put those pieces into place and take the time and investment in this person, pour into this person. Non-training firms, yeah, if you're not willing to put that time and effort into it, then you do need to find someone who absolutely knows how to do this job. But just because they know how to do the job doesn't always mean they know how to do the job at your firm. So you don't completely get out of the training piece. You still have to let them know, this is how we do it. This is the system we use. This is where you enter it in the case management system. This is how you run this report. This is how we talk to clients. This is our criteria. All of those things still need to happen. You can't ignore that and just hope that they sink or swim, because that's not the best approach.
Yeah, it makes total sense. Still on the topic of talent acquisition, moving towards one of the topics you and I discussed before is leadership, and specifically leadership in, operations roles and, business development roles, things like that. I've heard a lot of talk lately of people trying to hire COOs, director of operations, things like that. How should companies think about this in hiring folks? Is it better to hire from the industry, from without the industry? What are your thoughts on, fractional COOs or CFOs and how to engage in that kind of relationship? Any thoughts about best practices of trying to sort of up your operational competency within the firm?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting that you mentioned COOs first, because I think that operations position, I don't know. I feel like there maybe is a shift. There's a sea change happening in the personal injury law firm space where I think owners are starting to see that that is a necessary position at the firm. I think for so long owners were, hey, this is my firm and I'm going to try to take this all on my own, or I'm not going to delegate. And that's such an impediment to growth, right? When you have an owner who's trying to have their hands in all of the operations piece at the firm, it's not the highest and best use of their time. And we like to, use a phrase that sometimes it's surgeons piercing ears. We don't need this person with all of this expertise doing this, ordering toilet paper. That's not the highest and best use of their time. So acknowledging that operations role is an important one at the firm. And it really depends on the size of the firm. Not, a 5-person law firm does not need a COO. They can oftentimes get by with an office manager, and you have different levels, office manager, director of operations, COO. It really depends on the size of the firm, what the right fit for your firm is. But I think that operations role is a vital piece. Having that mezzanine level of leadership that is that person that can hold your team accountable, that can run those reports that we talked about earlier and do some of those diagnostics on that report, that really frees up the owners to only have to look at the scoreboard reports. Hey, are we winning or losing? How are we doing? I can look at sort of some of those high level reports, and then I can work on growing this business, being an entrepreneur. If that's where I want to be, I can work on high value cases. I can really put my time where my time belongs and let somebody else really manage that piece of it. And depending on how big the firm is, there can be other layers under that as you have those emerging leaders that are coming up. I think a COO, it helps if that person has experience in the legal industry, because the personal injury legal industry is such its own animal. And I think it's a big learning curve to come in from another industry and learn all of the ins and outs of all of those pieces of a case. And I'm not saying it can't work. It absolutely can. We have seen it work. But if you find that unicorn out there who happens to have personal injury legal experience, that is ideal, because that person really understands what it should look like. And sometimes firms will say, I'm going to promote somebody from a case manager into an ops position. And I would say that too can work, but I think you have to approach it carefully. You don't want to get into a situation where you've got a super technician, somebody who was really good at their job here. So I went ahead and gave them this responsibility here, gave them no leadership training, and just assumed that they were going to be able to adapt into this role and take it on. That's not fair to that person. And sometimes then you lose your best case manager, or you lose somebody who is amazing at what they do because you've promoted them into a position that's not necessarily part of their skill set. So I think that person in that COO position really needs to be somebody who has a high emotional intelligence, who can work with the team, who can inspire the team, who can be human first, and who can kind of go in and take that bird's eye view of the firm and say, where are those areas where we have opportunities for improvement? Who can I identify at this firm who can get some of these things across the finish line and work with them, who can look at those reports and speak intelligently up the chain to the owners and down the chain a little bit to the other team members. Fractional COO work we have seen, it's a little harder. I think a COO position, I like to see it in the firm. But that said, we've seen other firms that have fractional COOs that are working beautifully. As long as you've got the infrastructure, as long as you've got the processes and procedures down and that person can plug into it, it can work, but you have to have the right person, the right team, and the right owner mindset for that to work appropriately.
Does that person play a little role if they're fractional? Does it play a little bit more of role of like, it's almost like a coach that kind of comes in and is like, let me give you the operational pieces that you need to change, and then we'll check back in a week or whatever it might be. And they kind of sort of act as that guide for everything, even though they're not in it every single day?
Yeah, I think that's a good description. And sometimes that's where we plug in too. I mean, I think sometimes at Vista, it's almost like a fractional COO service, because what you just described is what we do. I mean, we come in and coach the team to say, hey, we're going to meet you where you are. Here's where the firm is right now. Here's where the firm wants to get. What are those things that we need to do? Here's your assignments for the next 2 weeks. We're going to check back in and see how we did and where we are and sort of how that worked. So that's kind of where we plug in. And I'm thinking to our fractional CFO service, where that's really somebody coming in and putting together that reporting package, that accounting reporting package, and working with somebody at the firm. Maybe it's a bookkeeper at the firm. Hey, let's look at your trust accounting. Let's make sure we've got this set up appropriately. Let's make sure your chart of accounts looks okay. And then we're going to look at these reports every month and analyze them. And I'm going to help you understand what you're looking at, and not just here's the reports, throw them on somebody's desk and we're all good.
Yeah. What do they actually mean? Help me interpret this and make these insights actionable rather than just like, hey, here's the report.
Yes, exactly.
That makes total sense. From the talent perspective, I know one of the things that you and I talked about also offline is, your thoughts around diversity and sort of how important that is and how to think about that. How should firms think about that? What are your thoughts on hiring for that and finding people that maybe are sort of high potential and high value, but maybe outside the mold of where we typically look for talent?
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes diversity almost gets viewed as a little bit of a dirty word. And maybe in our industry, we don't give as much credence to it as we should. But honestly, we are working in the personal injury profession. Our clients are everyone. If there is no diversity on our team, we can't best represent our clients, right? Because our clients are not just this specific person. Our clients are people who have been injured in a car, walking down the street. And that person looks like everyone, right? That there's not one person that
literally anybody. Yeah. If you drive a car, you could be our client. Yeah.
Exactly. And so if you've got nobody on your team that's looking at things from a perspective that's maybe a blind spot for the owner, then you could be alienating potential clients. So we talked about it a little bit earlier. When we're attracting talent to our website, what does our website say about us as a firm? And are we potentially pushing away clients and pushing away talent with messages that we have on our website or don't have on our website? And I'll give an example, and maybe this one is a little bit salacious, I guess. I'm using this as an example because it is a real life example, that a firm that was giving out Bibles. Okay, that feels innocuous, and this is something that's important to the firm. But for a certain group of people that may feel like, I don't want to come work at this firm because I don't know if they will accept me for who I am. I don't want to use this firm as my lawyer because they may not accept me for who I am or provide representation to me fairly as they would to other people. So just those things that you want to think about, the language that you're using on your website, in your employee handbook, all of those things, we want to make sure that we are attracting talent that looks like every person and attracting clients that looks like every person. And if we don't have people on our team that can speak for those people, we have a blind spot and we're missing out on that.
That makes total sense. Yeah, especially just given car accidents, motor vehicle accidents, it could be anybody. So try to represent the community, the diverse group of clients that you might end up having. That makes total sense. Mm-hmm. That actually segues into the other question I had. This question was not on the docket, just something that I was reading yesterday. I'm curious to get your thoughts on. I was just reading through industry statistics. Like I'm just fascinated by the justice gap that we see across legal services. And there's reports that I read talking about how something like 94% of people below a certain income line don't get legal representation for various civil legal matters. And then I started drilling into some other reports just on personal injury, and then I went specifically just on car accidents. And I believe the stat was there's about 1.7 million car accidents per year that result in some form of injury. Now, not every one of those necessarily is suitable for a legal case or has, someone else at fault for an injury or whatever. But then I looked at stats on how many personal injury cases there are in total, and car accidents in total. I think it's around 400,000 roughly per year ish. I might be off on that. Long story short, I was trying to triangulate like how many actual cases are there per year and how many could there be? Because it seems like there's this massive opportunity in the market. And I keep thinking about personal injury firms sort of competing with each other, but it's like the biggest competitor is like not hiring an attorney, it seems like. And I started going down the path of like the insurance journals looking at loss ratios, and they were talking about how about 30% of all auto claims have attorney representation. I saw another stat saying 10%. So let's call it 20. That's a lot of claims that don't hire an attorney, a lot of claimants that don't hire an attorney. I'm just curious to get your thoughts on that. Like, do you see this as like just a massive opportunity to grow the pie for everyone? Or are we maxed out on the amount of personal injury, or at least car accident cases per year? Just curious your thoughts on the market in general.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. It kind of makes me think about a variety of things, because I feel like, and I keep taking it back to, lack of diversity. But when we think about like what education and what marketing would strike a chord with a certain group of people, we can only understand what strikes a chord with us, right? Like, I don't know what's going to strike a chord with you. I don't know what's going to strike a chord with the Spanish speaking population. I don't know what's going to strike a chord with a group of which I am not a part. So I think it is important to stay authentic to who you are. Because I think if I'm just trying to advertise to a group of people, but I haven't taken the time to educate myself on that group of people, that becomes a little problematic, right? But we've seen firms that have done some really, really amazing things with disadvantaged populations in the area where their firm is located. So, and really nothing to do with traditional advertising, but like getting involved with community organizations in those areas, doing some charity work, like, hey, I'm going to come to this event that's happening in my local neighborhood, and I'm going to be there to give away bike helmets and just answer questions. And I'm not there in a heavy sales way. I'm there because maybe people who are part of this population don't know that they have the opportunity to work with an attorney at no cost, and that there's no cost to them unless their case is won. And so it sometimes just becomes that education piece. And I think we don't always think about those opportunities in marketing, or don't always hire people that may have an in those communities, or, and sometimes that looks like, hey, I belong to this church that's in this potential neighborhood. And so I'm educating those people about church, and that sort of spiders out into the larger organization there. Or it's, hey, I'm advertising on this radio station that's maybe a specific radio station, and it's more of an educational campaign than it is on hire an attorney, because maybe that's just noise. I don't think about hiring an attorney, but if I'm educated on why and how and when I should hire an attorney, that's a different story, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure all of that is well thought out or super coherent, but it's just kind of thinking through how we can stay authentic to who we are as a firm, leverage the team members that we have on our team that could be a part of other groups. If we have an attorney who's part of the LGBTQ community who is doing events with the LGBTQ community, that is a way for us to sort of authentically be a part of that community and get the name of the firm out there. And there's just so many different examples of that, of we all bring a different group of friends, family, community, whatever, when we come to work with us, and who we can potentially influence. So if we've got a team of people that have a variety and have come from different backgrounds, then hopefully those people can influence those other communities, or get the, marketing is everybody's business. So we said it earlier, and hopefully get the word out about the firm.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Yeah, it just seems like a big opportunity for everyone. Where can people learn more about you or contact you?
Yeah, I would love for people to visit vistact.com. So that stands for Vista Consulting Team, vistact.com. There's a lot of information on our website there. I am happy to talk to anybody who has questions about the business of practicing law. I'm M. Murrah at vistact.com. And all my information is also on our website as well. So, Julian, thank you so much for this time. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise, Mary Ellen, really appreciate you taking the time, and we'll wrap it there.
Awesome.